William the Conqueror is one of England's most famous kings. He was rather fortunate to win the Battle of Hastings, as some of Harold II's and his Saxon armies' decision-making was quite questionable, both before the battle and during. But William also, to an extent, made his own luck as well. And so he became king, and he went on to become a strong king. His castle building was quite extraordinary, really. I live near three of the remains of his castles, all within a short space of each other, and it is quite extraordinary, really. Obviously, his most famous work was the Tower of London. He's also known for the Domesday Book as well, and his administration skills were second to none. But one of his lasting legacy was tarnished a little bit by the harrying of the North, where he wiped out large parts of the population in northern England. Some people were said to have resorted to cannibalism just to survive after that. That really tarnished his reputation, and it's said that he regretted that even on his deathbed. So he knows that his actions there were completely over the top and unjustified, really. But he still remains one of England's strongest medieval kings. On to William II. William II was one of the sons of William the Conqueror. There was four of them, although one of them, Richard, died young. William succeeded on to the throne of England on his father's death in 1087. His older brother Robert became Duke of Normandy, and their youngest brother Henry was essentially left basically landless. William II doesn't have the best reputation for kingship, really, in medieval England. His reputation was brought into question because his relationship with the clergy was not the best, and the clergy were essentially the ones that wrote the chronicles of the time, and if you fell out with them, your reputation was going to be blackened. Because William didn't get married, it was implied that he might be gay, and that was one of the so-called accusations against him throughout his reign. The most important event that happened during the reign of William II was the First Crusade being preached in 1095 by Pope Urban II. This did have a impact on English history. Duke Robert of Normandy decided that he was going to go on crusade, and he essentially handed over possession of Normandy to William in return for payment. He used that payment to finance what was going to be a very expensive venture to the Holy Land. That would have consequences later on. In 1100, William died in mysterious circumstances. He was shot whilst out hunting in the New Forest in August of 1100. Some people think it was an accident. I'm inclined to think it was murder. The circumstantial evidence is quite strong. His youngest brother Henry also happened to be out hunting in the same forest, and 3 days after that, on the 5th of August 1100, he had himself crowned King of England. So when you look at it like that, you have to think that there was some sort of plot to remove William. And so he died in ignominious fashion and with quite a tarnished reputation. So, and he's rather been largely forgotten about. Henry I was now King of England, and in 1106 he became Duke of Normandy as well by defeating his eldest brother Robert at Tonchebray. Robert had returned from crusade essentially landless and so wanted to reclaim Normandy that he had given up to William II, but he was defeated and imprisoned to he died in 1134. So, having gone from being the youngest son with virtually nothing, Henry I now had everything. But he had his failings, and one of those failings was with the women, and it is said he produced 20 illegitimate children, and this eventually came back to haunt him. In 1120, his son and heir, William the Atheling, died in the White Ship sinking, and this left Henry with a big problem, because his queen, Matilda of Scotland, had died in 1118, and he had no legitimate male heir. Now, he had a choice. He could make Matilda, his legitimate daughter, his heir, or he could make one of his illegitimate male children his heir. He decided to make Matilda heir to the throne, but he must have known the nobility would not go along with that, and so he made them swear loyalty to Matilda 3 times before he died. So he must have known that there was going to be civil war after he died. That is what ultimately tarnishes Henry I's reputation. He really should have secured his dynasty quite easily by producing male heirs. And if he had spent his time doing that with his actual legitimate wife, rather than out with different women, civil war that would follow after his death might well have been avoided. And so on to the anarchy of the reign of King Stephen. King Stephen was a nice man, but he was not a ruthless man. He himself avoided death on the White Ship sinking in 1120 by pretending he had a upset stomach. He knew that the raucous behaviour of the crew could have caused a massive problem, which it did, and so by remaining sober, he had saved his own life. And in 1135, he benefited from that by snatching the throne from Matilda. Stephen had a claim to the throne by being the grandson of William the Conqueror, although Matilda, in my view, was quite clearly the legitimate and rightful heir to the throne. He benefited from circumstances that Matilda was actually in Normandy at the time of Henry I's death, and she was pregnant as well, so that gave Stephen the opportunity to nip in and take the throne. But what he failed to do himself was secure his own dynasty. It was essentially 2 decades of civil war in England, and Stephen's reign was essentially a complete disaster. In 1141, he was captured by Matilda and her ally, Duke Robert of Gloucester's forces at the Battle of Lincoln, and Stephen now found himself in prison. But the tide turned when Stephen's own forces captured Duke Robert of Gloucester, who was Matilda's strongest supporter, and that essentially meant that the civil war became a stalemate, because Matilda knew she could not win the war without Robert, and so she had to release Stephen from captivity. And so from there on in, things continued in much the same vein. In 1153, however, they did reach an agreement where Matilda's son Henry would succeed as King of England, and Stephen's own son would be disinherited. He wasn't very pleased about that, and he died, and Stephen followed him a year later in 1154. And so I suppose you can say Matilda did eventually win out, because her son, Henry II, would be the founder of the Plantagenet dynasty, which would rule England for over 300 years. But it had come at the cost of 2 decades of civil war, and this really was a disaster for the country. And Stephen has to be regarded as one of the worst kings England's ever had. He had absolutely no ruthless streak to him whatsoever. The one lasting legacy that he did leave was the fact that he actually spared the life of a 5-year-old William the Marshal. William was the son of a troublesome nobleman, and William was being held hostage by King Stephen, and it had got to the point where Stephen could have executed William because of his father's poor behaviour, but Stephen spared the boy's life. So he was not a cruel man. If that had, say, been perhaps William the Conqueror, he would have done what he needed to do. But William was certainly not a nasty or a malicious man, but he was quite weak. And that's ultimately why England had 2 decades of civil war.